It's a pleasure being here. Uh, can we do a quick round of introductions if you wouldn't mind so that I can at least, I won't remember everyone's names today, but it'll be good to at least know who everyone is, if that's okay.
Of course.
Yeah, please.
Yes, sir. Hi, I'm Shivra.
Shivra.
I run a water management firm with my husband, and we're now launching a website and app for water services to individuals and corporates.
Wonderful. Lovely, Shivra. Right?
Hi, I'm Tanu, and I'm running a firm called Human Factor, which is into disability inclusion.
Okay. Wow.
Hi, I'm Akanksha. I run IC Organic. We're an organic food business. We work with farmer groups across the country and we package our own products and we sell it across the country.
What kind of food?
Everything and anything that you need for a kitchen, so from fruits and vegetables to packaged snacks and dry groceries, which we manufacture ourselves.
Oh, excellent.
Hi, I'm Anayata Taneja and co-founder of Shrine and Fire, which is a contemporary art gallery in Delhi.
Wonderful.
And I also run Pranay Art Foundation, which is our not-for-profit initiative.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah. Okay. Oh, wonderful. Yes, hi, Georgina. Hi. Yes, of course, I know.
Hi, I'm Shifali Sumani and I'm the other half of Shrine and Fire.
Acha, okay. Oh, wonderful. Hi.
And the foundation, of course.
Oh, great. Are you related at all or? Oh, no, acha, just go.
We just happened to meet while we were working and then we decided to collaborate.
Oh,
but
to this.
Now it's been 15 years.
Wow, okay. That's a successful co-founder relationship, right? Hi.
Hi, I'm Tarini Nirula and
Tarini?
I'm the founder of TN Accessories, Tarini Nirula
Okay.
Accessories.
Wonderful.
So we work with the Indian artisans very closely to create handcrafted bags, occasion wear bags. And I'm also a yoga teacher, so building up a brand called Yoga Tara.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Share the light in yoga.
Excellent. Thank you.
Hi, so I'm Ira Kaur, and I'm Self-Love Mentor, author, and I'm a founder of a company, Self-Love Jewels, that deals in healing jewelry. So that jewelry is made consciously and with the process of magic.
Wow. And what is healing jewelry? It's special stones or?
No, it doesn't include any stones.
Wow.
It's based on the intention, and with the intention combined with the sacred geometry, which has created its own quantum energy field. And with the intention, we chant the mantra and yagya to energize it more. So that's how when you take it, it like heals your aura automatically.
Wow.
And the best part is like crystals get dirty, they don't get dirty. So you don't have to energize, clean anything. So like you can wear it and it's
Wow.
healing you.
And you give a guarantee to that? No, I'm just saying. No, this wonderful. Wow. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Aarti. I have a nightwear brand called Shop Blue. It's a D2C platform.
Okay.
And we also have a few international licenses like Paw Patrol, Baby Shark, Peppa Pig.
Wow. Okay. Excellent.
Hi, I'm Anuka. I run co-working and co-living spaces for artists, creative professionals, and travelers. We are in 4 locations: Delhi, Mussoorie, Manali, and Jaipur.
Oh, excellent. Very good. Hi.
Hi, I'm Cindy and I work for
Okay. Wonderful. Hi.
Hi, I'm Anushri. I run a play area for kids. It's in Gurgaon by the name of Zigzag.
Okay. Oh, wonderful.
I'm Anushka and I head programming for Ladies in
Right.
Hi, Vivek. I'm Analisha. I work
Yes, I know. Manish. Yes, hi.
It's a pleasure to hear you always.
Oh.
I'm really excited.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi, I'm Gaurav and my wife is supposed to be here to join me as well. We're from an FMCG industry and I'm currently looking to start a new venture which is into smart meters.
Oh, excellent.
That's Elisa.
It's Lisa. Hi, Lisa.
I'm Lisa and I'm part of the LW.
Oh, wonderful. How much time do we have, Lubhavani? 1 hour. So this is. Yeah. Whatever. So I have a presentation here with just a few thoughts because it's a very it's a very big topic. The importance of consistency, and by showing up late today for this session wasn't the best example of consistency. So my apologies for that. But this is your time. We can take the conversation in whatever direction you would like to. So feel free to interject, and the session will only get richer if you share your perspectives. And so just speak up. I'll call on some people if you're not participating, but just knowing what a wonderful audience this looks like, I'm sure you'll participate. But please, add your perspectives because there's so much of learning on this topic, which I think each of us can help contribute. And I'll also learn a lot just listening to your perspectives.
And the way basically started off with kind of what are the key elements of building
Correct.
a good business, and then we moved to Akhil and Pawan kind of doing their truncated version of the Ashoka course on like what are the basics of financial planning.
Got it.
Strategy.
Yep.
We looked at employee-centric culture with Shikha from American Express.
Correct.
And then we did Shovik
On branding.
of doing brand.
Correct.
So that's kind of what are
Perfect.
all the elements, and that's why this is
Perfect. Yeah. And I'll show it. We'll talk a bit of a framework on consistency, and what I'll try and do is share as many tips and actions one can take, because otherwise it'll feel somewhat like a Gyan session. And so therefore I think your inputs will be very useful in terms of also some of the perspectives that you all have gained from your experiences. But take a look at this list of things, and how many of these can you relate to? Trouble meeting deadlines? All of you always meet deadlines? Huh? No? Right? Too much to do and not enough time, right? For a lot of you are founders, getting too sucked up in the details, knowing when to be micromanaging versus when to be able to step away, right? Teams not meeting goals and targets gets very frustrating sometimes, right? Quality challenges, the inevitable complaining customers, and then also some things like employees leaving. Maybe as you're growing, you're not really sure how to grow next. Maybe profits are facing some pressure. Do these all sound familiar? Right? I think what I'll try and talk about this is perhaps, is consistency one of the ways to be able to deal all of these various kinds of issues. And these issues intersect your role as a leader, how you think about your teams, and also how you manage your business. And we'll try and actually explore all those three various aspects. But the first important thing is really what is consistency, and I've tried to lay out a few things here. This list could be longer, but at the end of the day, consistency is about, first of all, doing what you say, right? And then living up to whatever you've promised. Particularly a lot of you who are in consumer businesses, I think ultimately the proof of the pudding is, are you actually delivering what your consumers or customers are expecting from you? Are your employees hearing and listening, and are you living up to the promise you're making to your employees, and are you really doing what you say? To be able to get to that, consistency is all about probably a certain amount of repeatability and a little bit about standardization, which in some ways might sound somewhat boring, but ultimately that leads to a lot of clarity and coherence. So that's what, at the end of the consistency is being able to actually run things in a fairly routinized and a standardized manner. Does this make sense? Anything you would add to this?
I'd be curious to know in which situations does the standardization get thrown out the window, and where can you make those?
Yeah, I think we should talk about that, and I think, was it Oscar Wilde who said, consistency is the last refuge of the unimaginative, right? So there is, I think we should talk about that, because, in some ways a lot of people say, if you're consistent, you can't be innovative. But ultimately, unless you have a clear innovation process, you really can't scale up innovation. So it can lead to a certain amount of inflexibility. It can lead to a certain amount of that creative blocks and sparks missing. But that's a very small subset. But particularly for a lot of you who are running and scaling up organizations, I mean, if you're an individual artist, right, perhaps consistency may not be that important. but for generally for everything in an organization, at least if you're in a leadership role in an organization, I would argue that without consistency, it's very difficult to grow and scale up the organization and also have a life. Otherwise, you are the one who will have to do all the work. Yeah.
I would also like to understand better for a very young startup.
Correct.
How much of this is important and how much of this can be done?
Correct, yeah. So I think, let's talk about that also, because in terms of your personal self, I think whether you're a 1-person company or 5-person company or 10,000-person company, the lessons about how you're consistent to yourself, I think will apply in every single situation, right? Consistency in a team and some parts of a business may not fully apply, because in the beginning it's all about survival. It's all about product market fit, right? There you honestly don't even know what the answer is, and still while you're figuring things out, easy to say, look, let's put a process into place. But unless you really have a business that you've proven, the process may be less meaningful in any case. But let's talk about that, because that's a very important part that you're asking, right? Let me show you a 3 or 4 minute video. I don't know how many of you heard of Simon Sinek. He's a wonderful, wonderful guy. He wrote his first book about, I think, Tell Me Why, and Start With Why, I think, right? And then he's written this amazing book called Leaders Eat Last, I think. It's about a 4 minute video, but I think it's worth listening to some of the ways he talks about consistency here.
Yeah, I was going to ask, because when you talk about making this improvement, which really is about there's this crusader out there who is incredibly effective at communicating this stuff and getting people excited about it, and actually taking things from the ephemeral and making it very tangible. Do you think that's a question you're going to have to answer at some point?
No,
show people how to
metrics are fine. The metrics are fine. They're just not in the short term, and they're just not fixed in time. So, for example, do you love your wife? Right? Prove it. Like, what's the metric? Give me the number that helps me know, right? Because when you met her, you didn't love her, right? Now you love her, right? Tell me the day the love happened. It's an impossible question, right? But it's not that it doesn't exist. It's that it's much easier to prove over time, right? So all leadership is the same thing. It's about transitions. So if you were to go to the gym, right? So it's like exercise, right? If you go to the gym and you work out and you come back and you look in the mirror, you will see nothing. And if you go to the gym the next day and you come back and you look in the mirror, you will see nothing, right? So clearly there's no results. Can't be measured. It must not be effective. So we quit, right? Or, if you fundamentally believe that this is the right course of action, you stick with it. Like in a relationship, I bought her flowers and I wish her happy birthday. And she doesn't love it. Clearly I'll be wrong. That's not what happens. If you believe there's something there, you commit yourself to an act of service. You commit yourself to the regime, the exercise. You can screw it up. You can eat chocolate cake one day, you can skip a day or two. It allows for that. But if you stick with it consistently, I'm not exactly sure what day, but I know you'll start getting into shape. I know. And the same with the relationship. It's not about the event. It's not about intensity. It's about consistency. Right? You go to the dentist twice a year, your teeth will fall out. You have to brush your teeth every day for 2 minutes. What does brushing your teeth twice a day for 2 minutes do? Nothing. Unless you do it every day, twice a day for 2 minutes. Right? It's the consistency. Going to the gym for 9 hours does not get you into shape. Working out every day for 20 minutes gets you into shape. So the problem is we treat leadership with intensity. We have a 2-day offsite, we invite a bunch of speakers, we give everybody a certificate. You're a leader, right? Those things are like going to the dentist. They're very important. They're good for reminding us or getting us back on track, learning new lessons. But it's the daily practice of all the monotonous, little boring things like brushing your teeth that matter the most. She didn't fall in love with you because you remember her birthday and bought her flowers. She fell in love with you because when you woke up in the morning, you said good morning to her before you checked your phone. She fell in love with you because when you went to the fridge to get yourself a drink, you got her one without you. She fell in love with you because when you had an amazing day at work, and she came home and she had a terrible day at work, you didn't say, yeah, but let me tell you about my day. You sat and listened to her awful day, and you didn't say a thing about your day. This is why she fell in love. I can't tell tell you exactly what day, and it was no particular thing you did. It was the accumulation of all of those little things. And she woke up one day, and as if she pressed a button, she goes, I love you. Right? Leadership is exactly the same. There's no event. There's no thing I can tell you have to do that your people will trust you. It just doesn't work that way. It's an accumulation of lots and lots of little things that anyone by themselves is innocuous and useless. Literally, pointless by themselves. People will look at little things that are good leadership practice and say, that won't work. And you're absolutely right. But if you do it consistently, and you do it in combination with lots of other little things, like saying good morning to someone, that looking them in the eye. My friend George, who's a 3-star general in the Marine Corps, he says his test for leadership, and I love this, he goes, his test for good leaders, if you ask somebody how their day is going, you actually care about the answer. Right? The number of times we're walking to a meeting, we're rushing, we go, how are you? I'm good, I gotta get to you later, I gotta make everything. If you ask the question, you were standing there and you were listening to the answer. It's those little innocuous things that you do over, 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 and over, that people will say, I love my job. But I like my job. I like my job because, yeah, the challenge is great, it seems well, I love my job because I don't want to work anywhere else. I don't care how much somebody else is willing to pay me. I'm devoted to the people here, and I care desperately about the people here as if they were my family. In business, we have colleagues and coworkers. In the military, they have brothers and sisters. That's how they think of each other, right? If you really have a strong corporate culture, the people will think of each other like brothers and sisters. It's like a family, right? No. Brothers and sisters. Deep love. Fight, but the love doesn't go away. Right? Bicker, but the love doesn't go away. And I'll fight with my sister. If you threaten my sister, you'll have to deal with me. Right? We'll fight internally, we'll bicker with each other. But nobody's going to hurt each other. If anything from the outside shows up, you're looking at a unified front. Brothers and sisters. And how to create brothers and sisters upstream. Common beliefs, common values. You know, parents, in other words, executives who care about their children's success, who care to raise their children, teach them skills, discipline them when necessary, help them build their self-confidence so that they can go on and achieve something more than you could have ever imagined achieving for yourself. That's leadership. An absolute love and devotion to the people who committed their lives to this enterprise.
What do you guys think?
I agree with obviously everything
Yeah.
you said, but at the same time, like being consistent, especially as a leader, how do you, what if you're doing something wrong and you're thinking that you're being consistent and that'll lead to a result? So how do you kind of get yourself out of that rut and be like, you know what, this is not working and maybe I need to kind of change or pivot or like kind of change my approach to this particular situation.
Yeah.
So the idea of being consistent kind of like, I don't want to use the word blind you, but like kind of blur the lines between like wanting to try something different.
Correct.
Right? Like
Let's go through that. You know, we'll talk a little bit about that. That's a great point. Yeah. But I think for me, it was a big reminder that say good morning before you check your phone. But you know, what's amazing is it's a fairly loaded word, but it's those small, monotonous actions which you have to keep on doing in a certain kind of a rhythm, right? It's almost like a heartbeat. And if you think about, you know, our heartbeats, they are predictable, they are, you know, rhythmic. And the minute your heartbeat goes irregular is when you actually have to go to the cardiologist, you know. And the title of this had called the Symphony of Consistency. But think about a symphony. You know, a symphony is a wonderful example where you have a bunch of musicians, all of whom actually have predetermined notes. They are playing certain instruments, and you have a conductor who's trying to pull this together. But no one ever deviates in a symphony from their script. But the result of this is pure magic. And so in some ways, I think that's the important thing, is that it's those small steps that you have to keep on taking on a daily basis. This is what consistency is all about. And why is it so difficult to be consistent? One is, as you said, sometimes market conditions suddenly might change or your assumptions might change, right? But if it's a bunch of small actions that we have to take, then why is it so difficult for us to be consistent?
I think like having a bad day is like the biggest issue, right? Because you're so caught up in your head or trying to solve a problem, you might miss that good morning.
Correct.
Or a thank you.
Yeah.
Right? Or like your email is just a little too good.
Correct.
Compared to how pleasant you were.
Right.
Sometimes you have these set patterns.
Yes.
So used to.
Correct.
So it becomes really difficult to break those. The
Correct.
mind gets so conditioned.
Correct. And I would almost call those set patterns to be probably blind spots or biases over time, because if it's a one-off, it's something else. But if that set pattern keeps on, repeating itself, then perhaps it's a blind spot that we're dealing with, right? So.
Also sometimes results coming, we didn't go.
Exactly. The gym was a wonderful example, right? Because so many people give up after 2 or 3 months because they're going hard, they're trying, they don't see the results, and which is why so many dieting programs fail. Most dieting programs fail because it's so difficult to be consistent. Think about the diets, right? I mean, 90% of diets actually fail because people try for a while, but it's so difficult to keep on doing the same thing over and over again. And you try and take one cheat day, that one cheat day becomes 2, 2 becomes 5, 5 becomes 10 actually, right? And then you just give up and say, look, yeah. So I'll talk about 3 lenses of consistency just to break this down. How do you think about being consistent to who you are as a person? How do you think about being consistent as a team leader to your employees and your team members? And how do you think about consistency from a business point of view? How are we thinking about what are some of the principles you can apply to think about consistency from a business point of view? And there are 4 broad aspects I would put down if you think about consistency to yourself. Number 1 is actually self-awareness. It's so important for all of us to be able to look in the mirror and know some of our strengths, some of the things we don't enjoy doing, right? So if you're not an early morning person, it's good to know that. And for some of you who are founders, you can actually change the working hours of your organization as well. You have that power, right? But in some ways, being able to actually look in the mirror and know who you are as a person, what your leadership style is, what things piss you off, right? And if for some of you, if it's important to get your first cup of coffee in the morning, it's just good to know, who you are as a person, what makes you tick, what gets you irritated. Those are, I think, important things to figure out. And the part which is very important here is also what I call micro stresses, right? What are some of the small little things which irritate you? Good to be able to find a way to be able to control them. So the starting step, I think, and generally men tend to be far more lousier than women tend to be. Women tend to be far more self-aware. Women are far more comfortable being vulnerable. But generally, I think, it's important to be self-aware, and it's also important to know when to ask for help. Particularly for those of you who are founders, you have to kind of project a certain image to your teams that you know everything, right? So being vulnerable, being comfortable with saying, look, I don't know the answer, being willing to actually ask for help, those are important traits for any leader that are important. The other aspect, I think, is about figuring out your own ways of discipline. I think it's important, particularly for those of you who are leading organizations and scaling them up, is figure out what discipline means to you in terms of a certain routine, right? Important to practice that routine for your employees also. So if your employees, if your office hours are at 10 in the morning, as a leader, if you show up at 11 or 12, just think about the kind of signal it sends to your employees, right? So each of you will figure this out, whether you want to work late in the night, whether you want to wake up early in the morning. But I think having a certain amount of discipline in terms of a routine is important, because ultimately it's not just about you anymore. It's about your organization, it's about your team, it's about your customers. And so, it's no longer an island in the kind of roles all of you are playing, and therefore important to create that discipline. The third is, I think it's important to have some goals, right? And write them down. You can have, and I'm not prescribing having detailed goals that you have to live up to it, but generally it's good to at least have a roadmap and say, over the next 12 months, I want to achieve 3 or 4 different things. I want to increase market share, or I want to acquire 4 customers, or I need to hire 5 people or reduce costs by this much. But it's good to, if you're expecting your employees to have goals, right? Start with at least putting some of your goals down, because the rest of the organization's goals should cascade from what you have. So I think a lot of times people in leadership roles don't spend enough time putting their own goals down. And these goals can be business goals, it can be personal goals, it can be life goals. Figure out, what you do. And something which I have done with my kids and my wife is, we start every year, literally, over a bottle of, wine, and 2 of my kids now can drink also. So, but over a bottle of wine, we sit down and reflect on the year gone by. And we have our 3 highs and our 3 low moments. And we talk about 3 goals we want to achieve, right? It could be a fitness goal. It could be about reading X number of books. It could be business goals. But we share it. One is it really improves our cohesiveness as a family. But more important than that, it actually holds you more accountable, because the minute you actually share these goals, then you feel more accountable for being able to live up to them. And then we actually ask our family members for help. I remember a few years ago, I was very stressed at work, and I was getting a little bit tense and getting a little bit, anger was creeping in the way I was dealing with my kids. So I apologized to them and said, look guys, I need your help now. Like, if I'm in the middle of a meeting, don't interrupt me. And we agreed on some ground rules. And that actually became a great way for the family to help each other out. This is something we can do with your people at work as well. But I'd suggest go through this process of setting goals. Those of you who are very structured, I'm sure you can set up monthly goals, quarterly goals, 6-month goals, 12-month goals, and that's fine. I think, but go through a process of at least figuring out, where you want to take your organizations forward, and keep on reflecting and saying, are you there? What changes do you really need to be able to make? And then the 4th thing is, consistency requires.
On that note of goals over wine, I think
right.
that is the next home office goal.
Correct. Good. Thank you so much. The 4th thing is, at the end of the day, look, particularly for those of you who are founders, you're going to get more punches than bouquets, right? That's the reality of life, right? Life is hard. It's going to be lots of disappointments, and particularly for those who are starting up, the first 1 or 2 years you feel like, why am I doing this? Because everything seems to be going wrong, employees leaving, customers are unhappy and stuff like that. It just requires a tremendous amount of self-belief. And it requires this huge amount of tenacity. For those of you entrepreneurs, and I'm sure you've gone through this, it does require this craziness. And I've worked with 2 founders, Aman and Samir, who formed Boat, and I've seen that kind of craziness that they've had, which has made them quite successful. And obviously, at some point you may have to figure out, are you in the right direction? And we'll talk a little bit about that. But ultimately, there's a huge amount of tenacity required. We have to keep on plowing through what might seem like dull, boring, monotonous, monotonous work. And for those of you who've seen customer service with unhappy customers, calling up every single customer, getting feedback, it's not it's not the most fun moment, but the tenacity is very important as far as being consistent is concerned. And please pause, guys, if you have any other feedback here. Yeah.
You talked about goals in reference to self, but I can say that okay, I can set goals for myself at a personal level.
Correct.
But when it comes to business goals, and if you have other people in terms of founders and co-founders, so it has to be a shared goal, isn't it?
See, ultimately, look, for any organization, it's extremely, extremely important to have a goal setting process, right? Because ultimately, how will you ever evaluate performance if there are no goals, right? How will you give feedback if someone is off track, behind or ahead? How do you even decide compensation without just saying this person deserves this much? So the fundamentals of any organization has to start with some form of a goal setting process. And there's lots of sophisticated software, there are things like OKRs and all those things, there are tools are available. If you want to use them, great. But if nothing else, have a very simple process saying, look, here is, and there is this approach called the balanced scorecard, right, which talks about a customer goal, a process goal, and I forget the other 4 dimensions, but I think it's good to go through a process of just saying to everyone, and if you have co-founders, I think it's important for all of you to have a shared vision. And the vision will only feel like it's on a paper unless it translates into specific goals. What are we going to do about that vision? We want to be the number 1 player in something, but what does this actually mean? To become the number 1 player, we'll have to acquire X customers, or we will have to do those things. Those become the goals, I think. It's very, very important to actually go through a goal setting process. Yeah.
How important is it as a founder to share these goals with your team? And which goals do you keep to yourself? Which ones do you, for the organization at large, right? Because you might have a bigger picture in mind, which you might feel is too early to share with your team.
So if your goal is to sell the company, maybe do not tell that to your team. See, but otherwise,
How important is the communication when you're looking at bringing that ability and family doing it?
see, I think apart from some very personal and confidential goals, how will the organization know what to expect from them if you don't share that shared vision?
Yeah.
So the more you can actually create an excitement around a shared vision, right, and energize people saying, guys, we want to really become the best daycare or what was the center you said, Zigzag? Play. We want to become the best play area in Gurgaon as an example. May not even be Delhi year 1, but you can say year 1, we want to be the best in Gurgaon. Year 2, we want to be the best in NCR. Year 3, we want to establish a chain and be all over India, right? Think about how energizing it becomes for employees. And then you can say, what does number 1 being mean? Number 1 means we need to have X number of children. We need to have this kind of satisfaction scores. We need these kinds of repeats. All of a sudden it becomes very tangible to your team because they know what they are working towards. Because if you don't do that, very difficult to energize people. The choice you have to again make is how deep do you go into the organization, right? Does the receptionist truly need to know all the goals? Perhaps the answer might be no, because ultimately for the receptionist, his job is to come in the morning and greet everyone and then take all the appointments. And so I think you can tell them your goal is to make sure that I get 0 complaints and you show up on time, right? So that part you'll have to exercise, but I would encourage at least share a version of the goals, right? If you're in a very intense cost-cutting mode, right? Be careful about how much you share with the employees because suppose you have to let go of people, right? I think that's where you need to exercise some editorial judgment in terms of be honest and be authentic and transparent, but sometimes you also have to be a little bit careful not to demotivate people because some of them may not have that maturity or that big picture thinking that you have, and a very large company I was associated with, the CEO of that company told his management team, guys, we should try and find a way to be able to operate with 40% less managers. So the challenge he gave the team, can't we figure out a way to be able to operate with 40% less managers? People left that meeting, message is going out, 40% of the managers are going to get fired. Think about like how he thought he was being very open with his team, went and completely backfired with this huge rumor all over the place saying that 40% of the people are being let go. And this is at a senior level for a $2 billion company. It is not like, these are very mature leaders, and even someone of that caliber would just get extremely sensitive about these things.
Should the goals be more like department focused?
See, what you can start with it is company-wide goals, right? Then what my suggestion would be is for each department head to come back to you with their version of the goals. So for example, if one of your goals is to be able to improve customer service, and if you have a customer service lead, they need to come back and say, to improve customer service, here are my 4 goals. Complaints need to go up by this much, satisfaction rates need to go by this much, but encourage people. As the leader, you should be responsible for coming up with the organization-wide goals. But then if the organization is mature enough, encourage each department head to be able to come back with their version of the goals, right? That once you get their version, then you should give feedback and say, no, I don't like this goal, it's not ambitious enough, can you try and make this a little bit more specific? And wherever possible, try and attach some kind of an evaluation metric, right? Because how do you otherwise judge if the person's met the goal or not? Not everything can be quantified, but to the extent you can put some quantification, to it. So even for an HR person, I would say it would be things like, okay, attrition rates under control. You can even run a very quick satisfaction survey about how satisfied the employees are. You can look at, employee costs. So there are 3 or 4, but wherever possible, try and put a few metrics against the goals, because that's how you'll know whether the person is being able to meet the goals or not.
It's really detailed, but how many goals are too many goals? Like, a lot of times, like, especially happens in our organization.
Yeah.
Like someone's come up with 15 goals, and I'm like, it's unachievable, right? Like,
Correct.
But how do you?
See, I would say anything more than 6 to 8 is too much. Simple thing is, suppose you had a score sheet on a score of 100, and you had to give weightage to every goal, right? If you have more than 6 to 8 goals, then you're giving only 10% to each goal. That's not going to, people are not going to change and focus much more on it. So ideally 5 to 6 goals are plenty. If someone truly pushes hard, make it 7, 8, but my suggestion is 5 to 6, each with about 15-20% weightage. And we all know that people don't remember more than 3 things in life, right? So 5 itself is, is good enough. And the key also is to focus on the most important things in that person's jobs. Look, as founders, you do 30 different things, right? But your success is based on 3 or 4 critical things that will truly move the needle. So focus on prioritizing those things which will truly move the needle. The small things are part and parcel of what all of us end up doing, I think, yeah. There are 3 or 4, interesting tools I would suggest. How many of you have heard of this 1% rule? So, the 1% rule is a very interesting rule. It was, I think, formed by the British cycling team. There was a guy called Brailsford or something, right? And the British cycling team wasn't particularly doing very well till this person took over. After this person took over, for the next 10 years, the British cycling team, I think, won 59 championships. And in the 2008 and 2012 Olympics, they won 8 gold medals each. What? Huh?
I remember that was
Yeah.
the case study of the clothes, changing the material.
Yeah, so what they basically said was they talked about the power of marginal gains, right? Which is about they took a bike, figured out all the various elements that go into cycling, and began talking about how they can continue making 1% improvement on each of those things. So for example, they took the bike into a wind tunnel to fully understand the thermodynamics of a bike to how that can be adjusted. In the maintenance area, they wanted to keep the maintenance area without any impurities. They painted the floor white so they could actually take those impurities out. They taught all the bikers the importance of hand washing properly. 30 seconds of hand washing is so important because those impurities then end up affecting your your speed. But they went into those granular details, and basically they said, look, if we look at any problem, it might look really big. If you break it apart and you keep on looking at 1% improvement on every single of those things, collectively is how a lot of those changes actually happen. It's also called the power of compounding, right? So if you think about it mathematically, if you improve on something, say 1% every week, you would have improved by 67% in the year. That's the beauty of the whole compounding principle, right? So I think the one piece I always find is sometimes things seem very overwhelming. Break it apart for the teams and tell them to come back and start looking at incremental improvements. That's the way consistency actually happens, by making those small improvements on a daily basis in your customer service process, or even your salespeople, right? If your salesperson is making 5 productive calls a day, right? If you tell them, I want you to make 100 calls, that person will quit, right? Okay, you say, okay, instead of 5 calls, let's try and make 6 tomorrow. I know you can do it. Once they've done 6, oh, how about trying to make it 8? 8 now. So think about the power of actually incrementally making changes happen, and that power of compounding actually is amazing. And typically, generally in sports, that's how you see, swimmers. The swimmers will keep on improving their time, or runners. They'll improve their time by 0.1 second every day, right? And say, okay, let's try once more. Let's try once more. For any of you have kids, or if they're walking, right? This is how you teach them how to walk also. Take one step, try one more, and suddenly they're running after some time, right? And that's related to, again, what I call this power of micro moves. Micro moves is, if you're on the dance floor, you take one step towards dancing, the other person ends up taking a step, towards you. So sometimes change can feel very overwhelming, but try and figure out micro moves, which again leads to the power of what I call small wins or micro victories, right? Celebrate the small moments, celebrate that one customer win. That gives confidence to your team. And typically as founders, I think most founders I find are very hard on themselves, right? They are their worst critics, right? Nothing is going good, everything is bad, life will fall apart, So as for founders, it's even more important to be able to instill that feeling of, a celebration, a small cake in the office for those small little victories. The more you do it, it gets very contagious. And that's the way you'll start seeing consistency happen. The fourth one, I found this very useful, is I actually have a daily to-do list and a weekly to-do list. And what I do is, usually on a Sunday, I'll prepare my list for the week. And some of these items are broadly, I call them 2 wish lists. Not everything is exact. If I have the time, I'll do this. And there are some things which I have to do, right? And then usually I'm pretty anal that and I do this on yellow pieces of paper. And I learned this from my old boss, Adi Godrej. And Adi was, a very frugal guy. So he would take printed paper, the white side, cut it into 4 pieces, and he'd have a piece in his pocket every day. And for every meeting, if I'd go to him, he'd take out the list and say, okay, Vivek, I need you to do this, you know. So that's the way I learned from him the power of being able to. And Adi was an extreme where he would not even leave office without clearing up his email box. And just anal about it, you know, and I still struggle with, I have 11,000 emails in my email box. I don't know about you guys, so many of them are still unread, you know. So, but I think it's good to be able to create some kind of a to-do list. And my suggestion is try and do the most difficult pieces first in the day. Most of us end up doing the easier things, but when your mind is fresh, unless you're getting distracted, try and at least tackle a couple of the more difficult ones first. If it's not everything, you know, mix and match a little bit to get some sense of accomplishment as well. But I'd suggest, you know, you may find a to-do list a useful way to ensure that things are on track, particularly for those of you who are founders here. I'm sure there's so much of firefighting you're doing all day and you don't even know where the day ended up, and you don't even feel accomplished because you've been running around from here to there. But if you look at the list in the evening and say, okay, tick, tick, I love the sense of power I get by scratching it out, saying done, 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 you know, like yes, today was a, you know, a good day, right? And for
I'm at home without my diary at all, ever.
you don't, huh? That's amazing, right? Because that's just a way to keep, you know, structured, and especially if you are balancing family with you know, work, etc. It's very important to be able to try and do that. Sounds like a very simple thing, but trust me, this small little tool can become critical. If you are overwhelmed with too many things, try a two-stop list, right? What are some of the things you'll either delegate or just let go, right? That doesn't have to be done on a daily basis. It can be every 3 months or 4 months, but just end up saying, look, I am not going to get involved in this. Let this person actually handle. But the discipline of also knowing when to say no, particularly as your organization scale up, there'll be so many demands of your time. And the most valuable asset in each of your companies is your own time. That's the biggest asset, and trust me, that is the biggest bottleneck also, right? That will become the biggest bottleneck also as your organizations end up growing. So being clear about where and how you spend both your time and your energy, I think is extremely, extremely important. But if you don't manage it, hard to be consistent.
I have a question on
Yeah. Yes.
How do you make sure that work is still getting done even though you said no, right? Because the process of delegating means that either you have to handhold and train that person to take that responsibility on, which also takes up mind space, or you just let them figure it out and then wait for them to learn themselves. So where's that?
You know, it depends on the person, right?
You're handing it over.
Correct. You know, it all depends, because there is no one size fits all answer here, right? Because with some people, you can throw them into the deep end, but be there and say, look, I'm here. But before you do that, also have a tight monitoring mechanism, right? So if it's an important presentation you've asked someone to do, you don't have the time to do it. And if the presentation is due, if the meeting is the following Wednesday and you have 1 week, I wouldn't wait till Tuesday to ask the person how it's going, right? I would actually ask the person to say, hey, I really want you to do this. I think you're ready for doing this. This is what I want you to do. Why don't you come back to me within a day and share your rough outline, right? Break this apart into small steps so that you feel comfortable. Look at the outline and say, okay, this outline is not very good. Okay, why don't you go and spend some more time? Here is my feedback. Let's look at version 1 after two days.
My to-do list rather than saying do presentations as check-in with so and so about.
Break it apart into certain activities till you feel very comfortable. Now, after the person's done it once, the first time you may require 3 check-ins. After the person's delivered, maybe it will require 2, and maybe then it will require 1 check-in. So you'll almost have to, that person will have to earn your trust as well. So delegation doesn't mean you just just give it up and then you think everything will work out. Because then what will happen is the night before, you are the one who will have to do all the work then, right? So that makes like your life miserable as well. So keep...
Then stops you from delegating the next day.
Exactly, exactly, yeah. And that relates to the second point, right? Look, at the end of the day, meetings are a necessary evil. None of us actually like to have meetings. But the reality is that's how work happens in an organization also. How do people get aligned, right, without having meetings? My suggestion is have a certain rhythm of meetings, right? Are you going to have a quarterly review? Are you going to do a monthly review? Are you going to do a daily, check-in? For people who are in the product world, there's a methodology called Scrum, which is a very agile way in which products get developed. Every morning in a Scrum meeting, it's a 15-minute stand-up meeting. No one sits, you do a meeting, you align on the goals for the day, everybody gets going. How you run meetings is very important, right? One is, but please read the numbers before you walk into the meeting, because that's when some leaders will walk in and ask all these questions and the person says, but have you even read what I sent to you? And the answer usually is no. So Amazon has a very interesting approach, and this is Amazon even at this scale. But from day one, they do a couple of things which are very interesting. One is they do not have any PowerPoints. Right? Everything in Amazon has to be a Word document. The thing with a Word document is you have to think far harder. It's so easy to put 4 bullets onto a slide. There it's a full format. Everybody has to learn a certain way. If you want a proposal to be accepted by the management team, you have to put this down into a prescribed Word format. And it's amazing. Think about Amazon's consistency now. Think about consistency there, right? It sounds very simple, a meeting. But for them, they've made sure that meetings have to be consistently done every single time. The other part, what ends up happening is, and I learned this from, Nisa Godrej, because we'd have these meetings at Godrej, people would walk in, and next month we'd have the team again, and she said, this happened, people are nodding and saying, who's responsible? So a simple thing about meeting minutes and action items, it can be who, what, when. It can be as simple as that. But for the important meetings, and I'll distinguish between a casual meeting you will have with the 2 or 3 team members to get an update on how a customer visit went. But for some of your formal meetings, start with the process of an agenda, start with the process of very simple minutes and action items. If you can do it, trust me, the organization will get far, far more efficient, because so many times you ask someone, have you done it? He's like, I wasn't supposed to do it. This other person was supposed to do it. And they're like, okay, so those are again, so I think just think about how you use meetings to your advantage as a leader to be able to drive the actions you want in the organization. The second is, I think, find a way to get feedback. Feedback from customers, feedback from your employees, right? I've usually found personally for me, the best feedback comes from partners and spouses, right? If you just go and ask them, look, give me some feedback. We'll just get the most accurate feedback, because it's completely unvarnished, right? You'll get it. It may hurt. It might impact your relationship after that forever. But it's good to actually get that, but find ways to get feedback, right? It can be your team members. It can be customers. It can be through a mentor. It can be through a more formal process. But you will not be able to improve if you don't find a way to get feedback. And unfortunately, as leaders, we tend to get into our own echo chambers, right? Because we tend to surround ourselves with people who will only tell us the good things, or who will continue to praise us, right? So important to find a way to get feedback, because consistency requires an ability to improve. You will not be able to improve unless you get some ways to be able to get the feedback. with my teams, whenever we would have feedback sessions, there's something called the sandwich effect with feedback with teams. What you normally do is, with a team member, you start with some positive feedback, you then give some negative feedback, and then you put some positive feedback again. Guess what? The person's forgotten that negative or the developmental feedback, right? So again, when you're doing feedback, you can say to the person, you're doing all these great things, but today I want to focus on 2 areas you need to improve on. Let's focus on that. Let me figure out how I can support you, right? And I used to tell my team, in a feedback session, the only 2 sentences you can, as the person getting the feedback should say is, thank you for the feedback, tell me more. Thank you for the feedback, tell me more. This is not a debate. This is not a discussion. This is not about you are wrong, I am right. If you truly want feedback, it's important to listen, encourage your team members to also be able to do that. And the first couple of times it hurts like hell suddenly. What do you know? You're an employee, I'm the founder, do you know how much pressure I have had to deal with, to build this business, But then, that's true, but then how will that feedback help you grow? Right? It's great to be able to present your point of view, but that you're not in a court, or you're not trying to prove to the person that I know more than you, right? If you truly want feedback, then the only way to grow is to be able to accept, and then you can decide whether the feedback is fully valid or not. The third is, I think we talked about the process of goals and all. Find a way to communicate enough to your teams. That's the biggest frustration most employees have. They are like, I don't know which direction is the company headed towards. Find a way to create some communication mechanisms. You can send emails out, you can do town halls, you can get people together in informal ways, but find a way to communicate where the company is headed, what's working well, what some of the challenges might be, where do you want people to be able to step up, because unless you kind of communicate, how do you really make people feel part of this organization? And again, as founders and leaders, I personally feel like this is an area most of us underinvest in, because we get so caught up in so many other things, right? But do make it a point to actually find a way to communicate, and if it's with your leadership team, have a leadership meeting, have some one-on-one discussions, but have a certain rhythm to actually defining your communication approach. Please stop here. Any feedback? Does this make sense? Yeah. And then we'll open it up to lots of discussion. The final point is around, how are you going to be consistent in your business, and how do you feel confident that you're on the right track, right? So we'll talk a little bit about what consistency means from a strategy perspective. There are 3 very important parts of consistency in business. One is your brand, right? Every single bottle of Coke or Pepsi looks exactly the same. And I was taught this one thing where they called it the smashability test with Coke. And the joke used to be, is you take a Coke bottle, you break it down, through every single piece it's a Coke bottle. I mean, it's an exaggeration, but that's what they used to call it, the smashability test, right? So if for all of you, for those of you who are building a brand, what does that brand stand for, right? Even small things like your brand logos, your brand displays, your brand fonts, I would suggest, get that right and obsess over the smaller details, because see, ultimately, brands get built into consumers' memory structures. It goes into your subconscious mind, and then it gets etched there. But consistency is extremely important for people to see. If your logo and your packaging is in one place here, the other place there, people may not even fully remember it, right? So get that branding. The branding piece is extremely right to be very consistent with your brand, and also your brand proposition. If you're a premium player and you're doing premium, think about your discounting strategy, right? If you say, I want to be a certain price point, then if you're suddenly discounting massively, then people get very confused about your pricing strategy also. What does this brand actually stand for? So I think that's very important for your brand to be consistent in every single interaction that the consumers do. Second is customer experience. For all those of you who are running businesses that have customer experience, right? So we think about like an Aditya, right? And when he ran Indigo, Indigo was never the warmest, fuzziest airline, right? But brutally efficient, because the entire hallmark of Indigo was that we will get you there on time and safely, right? And it's still very irritating to me when I fly Indigo, where the bus will come, you're on the bus, and then you are standing outside the plane, and then you have to go in, but they are creating those constraints to move people in faster, right? So they have decided, look, let us piss people off for that amount of time, but ultimately people will feel far more happier if they arrive on time. So they've built the customer experience model again based on what Indigo stands for. It's again based on their strategy and said we want to be the most punctual airline, and the rest will be good enough, but we're not going to be extremely warm and fuzzy. And till recently, as you know, Indigo never even served coffee on their flights, right? Because they didn't want to, if you had a coffee machine on the plane, it would require time to clean the coffee machine, right? So they said we will not even have coffee machines, and even now it's coffee in packets and they open up the packet, etc. So the model was built. So for each of you, it's important to know what the right level of customer experience is, and how do you ensure that you are able to deliver the customer experience consistently day after day after day after day. And for those of you who've ordered from a Zomato, pretty interesting as to how they're driving customer experience on being on time, right? So when you order from a Zomato, it's actually quite amazing, because they'll tell you that your order will come within X amount of minutes, right? They've been able to figure out what that traffic pattern is, how busy the kitchen could be at that time of the day as well, right? And how popular the restaurant might be. So they have the algorithms to add commute times based on the time of ordering. They know how busy their drivers are, how busy the restaurant kitchen could be, to give you an estimate, right? And they'll tell you on top also, today we have delivered 97% of the orders before or on time, right? And they give you a commitment. And they say, if we don't live up to the commitment, we will give you a voucher for that same amount you have spent today. Think about that promise that they are giving, and think about how consistency is important to be able to figure it out, because if you get this wrong, instead of being able to deliver 97% of your orders on time, if that number was 70%, Zomato would get bankrupt probably, right? Think about the amount of money they would have to give for all these freebies. So they've also decided, only when they felt like they can live up to the promise, that they can offer something as much as saying we'll give you an equivalent voucher, etc., right? That to me is about customer service, is being able to actually break this down into every single piece and understand what customers actually end up valuing. Again, Zomato would have done the consumer research which said the single most important driver for the experience should be is people should get their orders on time, and they should get what they had ordered. The most frustrating thing would have been if you order something and you get the wrong order, right? But they must be focusing completely on getting the customer experience piece right. Whereas for someone like an Amex, right? And within Amex also, the customer experience will be very different for a gold versus a platinum versus a titanium card holder, right? The Amex concierge service would be very different for a titanium card holder. Getting the customer experience is extremely, extremely important, right? So we have at Boat a WhatsApp group with our top 40 leaders. It's called Keeping Boat Heads Happy, right? And this group pretty much is operational almost all day and into the late hours of the night. So each time any of us gets a customer complaint on LinkedIn or on Insta or Twitter, we post these on the group. And the customer service team will take those on and try and respond immediately. And that's the culture the founders have ended up building, because in our category, in audio, 60% of consumers will buy a product based on a recommendation. It's either a review on Amazon or a Flipkart, or it's a recommendation from some friend or family member. So again, for us, because this is an industry which relies so much on word of mouth and recommendations, we've said we will end up screwing up once in a while. It always happens, right? How do we find a way to quickly recover from that by creating this agility? Because if this group wasn't there, we would send it to our customer service team. They'd have 2,000 complaints there, right? And it would get lost. But if someone's made the trouble of writing to a senior person in the team, how do we create the culture that has to be responded pretty quickly? So those are some of the important things to figure out from your business perspective. What about customer service is very important, and how do you create the right process to be able to deliver on that customer experience? Particularly in this day and age, in the world of Insta and Snapchat and Facebook, right? Any bad feedback can completely go viral, right? And so how do you figure out what that right feedback is? Knowing if you made a mistake, how do you recover? Because look, mistakes will happen. It can lead to a crisis management situation also. So how do you respond pretty quickly to nip it in the bud? I think it's very, very important. So this is one area in this world of social media, I'd say is, every brand is a public brand today, right? So be extremely focused on making sure that you have generally happy customers, and for those who are unhappy, why are they unhappy? What can you do to actually convert them? The final part of consistency is all about operations, right? So for those of you who are running manufacturing, it's about being on the shop floor. It's about creating your standard operating procedures. It's about your routines. It's about training. But you have to codify and how things go, because if you scale up, your costs will, as you scale up, your unit costs need to come down. The only way your costs will come down is if you are actually being consistent in terms of your operations, right? So even a finance team, if it's an HR team, how many invoices is the team processing? Can we find a way to automate it? Can we put technology in? Those are ways to be able to do it, but most organizations will not scale up unless you're consistent in the operations of your companies. So factories are the easiest ones, because it's a shop floor and people are doing repeat tasks, but that same methodology can be applied to other parts of your operations as well.
I have a question.
Yeah.
While your business is operating, right, and you're still figuring this out, what these systems and processes are, but when should you have it all figured out? If your business has been like working consistently on a certain product and everything stays stable, right? We're assuming it's a perfect scenario where you can focus on this.
Correct.
What are those timelines looking like?
It's a journey. So, initially you can start saying, look, I don't need a fancy IT system. I'll just work with Excel. I'll at least put my list down on Excel. I'll provide the steps to an employee, right? So for example, for any of you who are doing gifting, right? There can be 10 steps in terms of how do you put the right gifting package on. And it can be a very simple Word document or an Excel sheet. As you get larger, you can create workflow systems. You can put them on. A little bit depends on how complex your operation is. Can you actually afford it or not? So you can't put in too many systems in the beginning if you don't have enough business, right? So it's a bit of a journey, right? And honestly, as a leader, you will know. You will know when mistakes are happening. You will know if customer complaints are going up, and you'll say, okay, why is this happening? Do I need to automate? Do I need to train better? Do I need to get better people? Those things will actually happen over time if you have the right feedback. You will know when you need to put those systems and processes in place. But you can start with very basic process and very basic systems in the beginning, itself, right? Yeah. This is a bit of a framework, and we'll go back to the pivot question you were asking. See, at the end of the day, for each of you who are running their businesses, I would urge you to ask 3 questions. What problem are you actually trying to solve? What change are you trying to break in the world? So if you're doing nightwear, what problem are you trying to solve with existing nightwear today, right, as an example? Or if you have a play area, what problem are you solving? It can be, look, there is no great place. Gurgaon is a concrete jungle today, right? And people and kids, there's not enough green areas, and people are not interacting socially, and most kids are spending the entire time on video games, right? So that's a pretty big problem, right? And the second is, why is this a big problem that somebody will actually care about? Not just because you're a founder, right? Because ultimately you have to say, look, I will create a great play area because Gurgaon's average incomes of professional people is more than 30-40 lakhs a year, and therefore they're going to be willing to pay. And I've spoken to 20 parents, and they've told me that this is such a big problem because they're sick and tired of trying to monitor their kids playing video games, that they are willing to pay X amount of money. So it's about, first of all, be very, very clear about what's the exact problem that you are solving, and it sounds simple in theory, but force yourself to ask that question. Look, I'm actually solving a problem, and this is a very, very big problem. Yeah.
Sometimes, so I run co-working spaces.
Yes.
So what is my differentiator? Why am I I'm also asking that.
Yeah.
But also about, ultimately everything is a co-working space.
But
so what is the differentiator? Sometimes you're not in meeting products. You're not able to really find what is so, okay, it's very beautifully done, you have an art angle to it, but ultimately it's a co-working space.
Push yourself. If you don't get the answer, it'll only be a Me Too company. Then how will you actually be able to do better than others, right? So I'll give you a simple example, boat, right? Boat started by making charging cables. You think about, look, a charging cable, what is the problem that is happening? The founders spent a lot of time reading through Amazon and Flipkart reviews and saw a lot of people complaining that charging cables, when you kind of put them into your bags, those edges tear, including Apple ones. Even today, it's a huge frustration. So the founders said, look, maybe this is a big consumer pain point. We read so much stuff. Can we innovate on it, right? They began working on this and said, okay, can we find a way to tighten and make the edges a little bit more durable? Then they saw another big problem was that, the materials needed to be more robust. And so they began using things like mesh, which was a much more durable material. The third thing they heard from consumers was that cables were only about a 1 foot long cables, right? And if you're far away from somewhere, people wanted slightly longer cables. So it was again more durable, stronger ends, better materials, right? And longer cables. And then they said, look, most of these cables are so boring. They are black or white in color. If we put things like denim on it, and for the younger generation, is there a way to actually put a more lifestyle component to it? They began adding colors to the cables, right? So in one sense, you start off by saying a cable is a cable. Every cable is a Me Too. You start understanding it deeper, and so then they launched cables, and then they said, but who will ever buy a boat cable where people don't even know what boat is, right? So the print campaign started by saying, boat now in India, which again felt like, oh, this is a global brand now available in India, right? So when I think about how smart the campaign was, boat now in India, and then they offered, this is where conviction comes in, a 2-year warranty. Because they had to tell people, look, our cables are so good that we will actually give you a 2-year warranty. The reality is, if you think about it, how many of us will buy a cable from Amazon if it is not working, bother to return it? But think about the brand promise, how that ends up playing. So something, and this became the biggest success. So before Boat launched headphones, charging cables was the first business they actually ended up launching. So to me, I think at the end of the day, every business will feel like a Me Too business. You owe it to yourself to figure out what are some areas in which you can differentiate. The differentiation may not even be earth-shattering. It can even be the kind of quality of coffee you're serving, right? I'm just thinking, I'm making this up, right? But there are some ways to think about, look, what do consumers want? If consumers want a fresh hot cup of coffee, you can guarantee and say, look, we will have the most hot coffee available for, if that's what they care about. But if you are going to feel like everything is the same, then it's very difficult for you to be able to meaningfully build that business. So I would urge you, there will be some differentiators, but you have to go. In some businesses it's easier, in some businesses it's much harder to go back and figure out what that differentiation is, because that's the third question. If it's a big problem, why do you believe you can solve it better than others? Because if you don't believe that as a founder, if you don't have that conviction, how will your employees have it? How will your investors have that same amount of conviction? Because you have to be able to sell that narrative to so many people.
I think that book, Start With Why,
Yes.
is a good...
Yes, exactly. Those are the fine. Yeah, that's a great book actually, you're right. Yeah. So I would urge all of you to be absolutely clear on what these 3 things are and keep on testing. Are you truly believing it or not? Get data, talk to customers. But if you fundamentally can answer these, if you can't answer these 3 questions, and there's obviously a framework, which from my colleagues at Bain, I've stolen the framework, which is about, look, why are you existing in this business, right? What is your ambition? Then it's about, where are you going to play? And then how do you win and how do you lead to results? And so for something like a Boat, we've said we are a consumer devices play. We'll play in, cables and headphones and smartwatches. But we will not do TVs. We will not do laptops, because the Boat brand will work there. But we said we have the how to win is not there. We don't know how to win in laptops and TVs, so we will not end up doing that. But that clarity on choice making, on where you are playing, how you win, is extremely important for you as leaders to be able to articulate your vision. And this is a wonderful video of it used to be a great book called Good to Great, which I think initially did very well, but some of those great companies then turned out to be not so great after 20 years. But when the book was written, these were fantastic stories. And he has this very interesting idea of what he calls the flywheel. Take a listen to this one.
With the great, the big things happen by pushing on a giant heavy flywheel. You start pushing in an intelligent, consistent direction. And after a lot of work, you get one giant, slow, creaky turn. But you don't stop. You keep pushing, and you eventually get 2 turns, 4 and 16 and 32 and 64 and 100 and 1,000, pushing, cumulative, consistent momentum, and at one point it's 100,000 and a million turns in that flywheel. Big things happen because you do a bunch of little things supremely well that compound over time. This is what we learn. We see tremendous consistency in any truly great enterprise. The signature of mediocrity is not an unwillingness to change. Although, and we'll get to this, if you don't change, you become irrelevant. But the true signature of mediocrity is chronic inconsistency.
So we talked about small actions. We talked about what we haven't talked about is the power of repeatability. That's the final piece here, is ultimately your repeatable models will create that competitive advantage. And I'll give you an example of a large company though. But ultimately, look, you have to know what gives you that drive. If your secret sauce is customer experience, that you provide the best experience, how do you create that repeatable model where for every single experience, people are, the last thing you want at McDonald's is, I remember when I went to Boston, I was in Boston this summer, and one of my favorite Italian restaurants, a place called Giacomo's, and their Diavolo linguine is absolutely the best. And I went there after 25 years this time, and I was like, wow, that linguine just still tastes exactly the same as 25 years ago. And I'm sure sometimes with our help at home, I get frustrated saying, I don't know how the food will taste, the same dish will taste every day. And this is the inherent part of Indian cooking, right? You just splash, take this hand and you put masala here, masala there, right? Which is why you find even in some of the best Indian restaurants in India, you say, oh my God, I had this amazing dish last time. What happened to it this time, right? So if you go to a McDonald's, for instance, right? By and large, 90% of the time, the fries and the milkshakes will taste very similar because they have a operating model where they've codified every single thing which is very important in their operations. By the way, the McDonald's table you're sitting on may not be clean every single time perfectly, right? That's not core to their model, right? Their model is our fries and our, and even, if you talk to the people who run McDonald's in India, what they'll tell you is, the two things we don't touch from the global McDonald's formula, and they're adding different recipes, but they're like buns and fries ko to bilkul, because that's the secret part of the McDonald's model. Not everything needs to be repeatable, but for those things which make your customers come to you, you have to find a way to create that repeatability, because that's how focus will happen. That's how learning will happen also, right? If you tell the McDonald's person, just figure it out, right? Think about the attrition in a McDonald's, right? People are leaving, coming, leaving, going, how do you keep on training people all the time again? So the whole idea of repeatability is all about faster learning. The third part is it removes complexity. If you just keep on trying to figure things on the fly, it leads to a huge amount of complexity in the organization, and finally, it creates more adaptability. I'll skip this slide, which is not that important. This is Nike as an example, and this is a large company, and Nike, the Nike model, first of all, think about it. No one even needs to write the word Nike anymore, right? This is enough. Nike stopped using its brand name. The swoosh is enough there, right? The second is Nike is always intended as the brand for the high performance athlete. That's how the Nike positioning is. So what they did, for example, was they started with running shoes. Basketball was there. They had some franchise properties, if you remember, Air Jordan and all, did basketball. Then began creating basketball shirts and shorts. Then went into actually creating basketballs. So that's the kind of journey they started off with. Then they said, let's take soccer on. Next big sport. Again, they started with soccer, went into footballs as well. Then they began golf. Started with footwear again. So for every single thing, they started with footwear. But when you want to grow as big as they are, they found a repeatable formula to be able to actually figure out what the next opportunity is and create that repeatability. So, I don't know if you've, I think it was, I forget the book's name, but there's this wonderful story about, it's called the Daffodil Principle by Geraldine Edwards, and she has this story where her daughter Caroline keeps on telling her, Mom, please come and visit me, I need to show you this amazing place. And for 2 or 3 times. She's like, it's a 2-hour drive. I don't feel like going. This is in California. Finally, she drives to her daughter's house for 2 hours. It's cloudy and foggy. And the daughter's saying, no, I really need you to come with me to see this place. So Geraldine reluctantly agrees with Caroline, and they go to this area. And she's absolutely mesmerized by seeing 5 acres of daffodils planted all over the place. And I think she writes about this being almost like a vat of gold, something that she had never seen in her life. And I think I have, and there she sees a sign, and I'll just read that, the sign to you. The sign says there 50,000 bulbs, right? One at a time, by one woman, 2 hands, 2 feet, and a very little brain. And the third line, I think, says from 1958. This one woman spent 40 years planting daffodil after daffodil after daffodil. One bulb at a time. There was no other way to do it. No shortcuts. Simply loving the slow process of planting, loving the work as it unfolded, loving an achievement that grew slowly and bloomed for only 3 weeks each year. This is true consistency, right? This is true consistency, because you have to plant a daffodil, have to water it, make sure it's growing, otherwise make some changes, keep on doing it. That to me in some ways was one of the best examples of consistency I could think of someone who loved her garden so much that she spent 40 years trying to bloom it. Let me stop here and open it up to any questions, feedback, reactions, your personal experiences, or anything you would want to talk about.
Not a question, but a lot of this, especially when you talk about processes and operations, it reminded me of the book by Atul Gawande.
Yes, the checklist, right? In the doctor's chamber, you know how they do it, right?
Different businesses.
Correct.
Correct,
yeah.
Following a process.
Correct, yeah. You know, and there was a question earlier on, you don't want to create, process should not become bureaucracy, right? And that's a very fine line as a founder. You will have to gauge where, I lived in Singapore for a year about 20 years ago, right? And I had gone to an ice cream shop, and I remember basically I wanted 2 scoops. And I said, can you give me 1 scoop of this and 1 scoop of the other? And the person said, no. Like, why? Like, no, I'm not supposed to. I'm like, but what's the big deal, right? It's not anything different. But that person had been trained that you cannot mix scoops with no rhyme or reason, right? So at some point, you have to give employees that freedom to be able, particularly in customer service situations, sometimes even at boat, we've told our customer service people, if someone's calling you, if they are really angry that we've made a mistake, please give them something free. Give them a free headphone, because if you don't, they will post on social media. That will lead to 20 complaints. 50 people will spend all their time on it. It's not worth the effort. So I think at some point you have to figure out that process should not lead to bureaucracy. But at the same time, for those of you founders, you can't let only chaos happen in the organization. So you have to find a way to start putting some basic processes into place without losing that creativity, without losing the that flexibility, without losing some of that jugaad, which is very important in the early days, and also some of that hustle. As founders, you will know what that right balance is, and you will have that, trust your instincts, and just see, look guys, we need to find a way to put a better process into place. So one thing, for example, we've done with our customer service at Boat is we have something called, we use the word called CAPA, which is I think a manufacturing term for root cause analysis. So each time a mistake happens, the person who's in charge has to come back within 2 days with a CAPA analysis, which basically says this is what happened, this is where we went wrong, and this is some of the changes we need to make to be able to not repeat the same mistake. Because I think making a mistake once is fine. Twice you should be questioning. 3 is harakiri, right? You have to find a way to make some change happen, because I think that's an important one, to have some system for you where the same mistakes are not happening over and over again. If it's happening over and over again, then either people are not trained, or you're not clear about expectations, or there is no clear process, or it could be the wrong person. It could be one of those things. But I think it's important to kind of build, as you grow larger in organizations, find a way to create value added processes without it becoming a big bureaucracy, which I don't think will happen with most of you, because as founders you're already very entrepreneurial. But that's a big challenge large companies end up facing, which is like there are 40 points of approval, and all of those things. But I think you will not have to worry about that. So, but I think I would encourage you to figure out, and again, you don't have to put a process for everything, but in the areas which are differentiators for you or which give you a competitive advantage, make sure that if you want to over deliver and surpass the expectations of your customers, I would focus on those areas and try and at least put some process in place. Yeah.
So as you grow, and especially at the scale of your companies, as a CEO, how much time do you end up spending, making sure that the processes that are being set are being followed? Because of course as a CEO there's so many other aspects that you have to so many other things.
Yeah. Zero time. I look at outcomes at the end of the day, right? So look, why is the customer satisfaction low here? And then I say, guys, let's go back and please come back to me and say what went wrong. Is there a process gap? Is there a capability gap? Is there a systems gap? Or what happened there, right? So that's the way, right. But, I will have a discussion with my team saying, guys, over the next 6 months, what are the biggest broken processes? So I'll ask employees and say, look, for a while, as an example to you, we felt like we were making some hiring mistakes. We were like, look, we've hired a bunch of people when we were in a big growth spurt during COVID. COVID was very good for our business because people were at home, they were using lots of headphones, and we literally had to double or triple our organization at that time, right? A lot of people who came on board were just, then suddenly we were realizing there were performance issues happening, and we had to ask people to leave for performance reasons, right? And so I said, why is our attrition rates actually going up? And then we said, let's take a look at a hiring process. And there was no hiring process, right? And then we said, but do we have an interview guide, right? Do we have a panel of people who are trained on what questions to ask? Once all the interviews are done, do we have a group feedback session to figure out the person's strengths or not? And then do we come up with a certain approach, right? That was a process gap which when we were a 20% company, you didn't need it. Suddenly with this kind of scale, we said, let's put a basic process into place. And we said, let's not create massive amounts, but let's at least, because what would happen, for instance, was we found that some candidates were saying no to us. Then we called the candidates up, and the candidate said, I had my first interview in January, the next interview happened in February, the third interview happened in March, right? Because people are busy and no one is, and unless you meet the founders, you can't make a decision, right? And we were like, okay, can we create certain interview days? Or maybe on certain Saturdays, we get all the candidates in together. To me, that becomes a process. It is not like a rocket science, but the process says, look, we will actually get the candidates in on a Saturday, and we will get back to the candidates within 48 hours with our decision. So to me, that's again a process without going through massive amounts of, documentation, and also again, figure out where the biggest pain points in your organization are, and come up with some guidelines even. Then that guideline can be called a process. Now, if you are in manufacturing, if you are in packaging, then you can have a workflow, you can have flow charts, and you can put those things down, right? Which is what manufacturing companies have to end up doing. So you can tweak this to whichever what works for your organization. Yeah. Yeah.
I'd love to know that in your experience,
Yeah.
I know we've spoken about consistency, but what are some examples where consistency was actually made really fun and exciting and innovative?
So, for example, one part of consistency used to be for us was filling out feedback forms, like, employee survey forms or 360-degree feedback forms. And at Godrej, HR would just get sick and tired of being agony aunt, agony uncle, reminding people, fill forms, and HR would always say, that's not our job. We have MBAs and all, and our job is to remind people and, there. So we then said, okay, on a Friday at 2 o'clock, we told all the managers, from 2 to 3 o'clock, all work will stop. We put them in the calendar, CEO meeting, right? And then I announced and said, okay, this next 1 hour, guys, you will all fill out your feedback forms, right? And we got in food and everything. So what again could have been a very boring consistency thing about form filling, you found a way to try and make it fun to also make sure it got done. And then HR wasn't wasting its time, because HR's job is to do so many other things, right? And if they are spending all the time trying to remind people, because ultimately, closure rates are an HR goal, right? You should have 80% responses, right, in a survey. Then HR, if they don't meet that goal, then everyone says, but why didn't you do it, right? So we said, okay, it shouldn't be HR responsibility. Let's find a way to try and drive consistency there. You can also find fun ways to be able to co-create processes, right? So for example, if there's a big issue happening with hiring, get 4 or 5 people into a room together and say, guys, let's figure out how do we completely change the hiring process. And so for example, when I again was at Godrej, we were like, look, it's getting so boring to be able to continue asking people to only send their resumes, which no one reads. So we said, let's give people an option to send videos of themselves, right? That was another innovation that came through people just brainstorming about, look, people used to get sick and tired of reading these big resume books. Videos are pretty easy, you're commuting, you're in your car, at home, you can quickly see the videos and shortlist some of the candidates. So I think a little bit again is, wherever it feels boring, as a leader, look, some things will feel monotonous, and that's the reality, of life, right? But if there's a way to make it slightly more interesting, I think there are interesting ways to be able to try and do it. It's like, I don't think like making fries in McDonald's can be a very fun experience, because it's a hot oven, there's customers are waiting, there's a certain amount of time. What you can do is you can treat the employees better after that. You can thank them, you can express gratitude, but some jobs inherently will have a certain amount of monotonous part to it. Your security guard shouldn't be too creative, right? Their job is to make sure that they are doing the rounds, rounds every day. There's an SOP about them not sleeping on the job, etc. So you have to adhere, and unfortunately, there's not much you can do to make the job, very interesting, unless you plant some crime there, where. But you can't, that's the nature of the job. But you can be more appreciative, acknowledge their name, get to know who their family is, create a scholarship program for the person's kids. There are ways to do it, but inherently that job will require a certain amount of consistency, and that's what they've been hired for. Yeah. So Yeah, yeah.
Perfect. You spoke about the self and you also spoke about teams. So my question was just a thought
Yeah, yeah.
is that personally I believe that the self is more controllable when it comes to consistency. And I'm sure everyone's opinion varies on that. But when you talk about teams, how do you kind of imbibe that culture of consistency, you know? You have something in your mind, but how do you make sure that in larger organizations, everyone shows up thinking the same thing every day?
Yeah. So two things. First of all, actually the self is the hardest one. It actually shows, I would applaud you because you are a very introspective person, because you are, I think, again, it's actually compliments to you that you actually think self is easy. But for most people, actually the looking in the mirror is the most uncomfortable part, because there are certain parts of reality which then you have to go for therapy and figure out, okay, God, what did you know? So that's what's hard actually, because I'll tell you, and the more senior you get, the less self-aware leaders become, because you're surrounded by people who are always complimenting you, and no one's giving you that tough feedback that each of us actually ends up needing, right? So I think that's why, and then success makes you even more less self-aware, because then you become a little cocky and say, yeah, I'm which is why very few successful founders can actually launch a second successful business. Think about the mega founders. Very few of them been able to replicate. You would wonder why, right? If the founder is so fantastic, why couldn't they replicate? Look at the person, one of the earliest famous founders in India, Sabir Bhatia, was the founder of Hotmail. Right? Have you heard of Sabir at all? Sabir sold it for $1 billion, his company, to Microsoft. One of the first massive successes, and this is about 20 or 25 years ago, right? Sabir tried like Arzu and tried so many different things, right? Inherently, you start, either you get more risk averse or you just get more cocky. I don't know what the reasons are, right? So to me, that self part is actually fairly difficult for most of us, right? On the team, honestly, it's a little bit about, my personal belief again is, at the end of the day, 20% of your employees will create 80% of the value, right? Focus on them first, right? Let them become your change agents. Let them get imbibed in your philosophy. Ultimately, look, if the entire organization, you can try and create this culture through a common set of values, right? A common set of principles, right? But some of you might be too small today to go through a very intensive values exercise, right? But you can put some values down. You can start using those values if you feel the urge to it. Put them down, and then communicate and talk about it, right? And then ultimately, there's a certain amount of training required also. Without being able to train people, and you don't need to run massive training programs. You have a great employee, say, hey, when a new employee starts, please train them, right? It can be as simple as, as that. So it's not as if you have to have massive training budgets and all, or if someone wants to learn something today. When Aman started, Boat, they couldn't afford a marketing agency. So first of all, he invited 20 of them to hear pitches from them, to learn from them, right? And then he went on to YouTube and Google and learned performance marketing from online, because he said, I don't have the money to be able to afford all these fancy companies. So he said, look, let me just beg, borrow and learn, and then I'll apply this on my own. And that's the way I would suggest to find ways to do it. But your employees have to, if you feel like somebody needs a little bit of training, most training is best on the job, right? And I think a lot of HR philosophies talk about also 70, 20, 10, that 70 has to happen through job and 20 is through classroom training, etc. But the bulk of it will need to be on the job. But find your stars in each of your company. There will be those 3 or 4 employees who will be delivering disproportionate value. Over-invest in them, give them more responsibility, ask them to train some of the other people. Yeah. This part has been very quiet here, so. Yeah. Yeah.
Then shall we move over to just casual wonderful chatting. All of you, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, my
Thank you so much
pleasure.
for your time. We do
Good luck
have-
with all of your journeys. If there's any point I can help you on anything,